Hey guys, welcome to the Sherlock Holmes Guide for Investigating Family Health. In this presentation, we're going to go over some basic ideas and skills that are going to help you get started on your research in the Family Lab, and then we'll go over one of the assignments that's going to be due on Learning Suite soon. Alright, so in this presentation, we're going to talk briefly about some important concepts that are going to help guide your public health research in this lab and in any other labs or research settings that you might work in later on. So going along with the Sherlock Holmes theme, this picture shows just how many times the Sherlock Holmes movies have been remade. And I'm sure there's more besides these few. The only one I've seen is the Robert Downey Jr. one, and I thought it was pretty good. But basically, all of these different remakes did a pretty good job at telling the same stories, just in a different way or a different point of view, or based on different interpretations from the directing crew. Um, as different as each of them are, they all did a good job at telling the stories in an accurate way, trying to stay true to the way that the books and the stories are originally written. And you'll find this to be true as well in different research settings. In this presentation and in a lot of other classes or presentations down the road, we're going to learn a lot about different tools and skills that will help you learn how to approach different problems in public health in different ways. There are lots of good ways to go about answering certain questions, and lots of different and good ways about addressing different problems in public health. There are certain ways that are better than others, but generally you'll find that there are lots of different ways that people are going to approach problems or issues in unique ways, kind of like how they made these movies. Okay, with all that being said, it's good to remember that there are certain research strategies that are more effective and better than others. Here, for example, are two very different interpretations of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Personally, I hate Will Ferrell, and I think we could all agree that his version of this movie and pretty much any movie is kind of a joke, and they're not meant to be taken seriously. Um, the Sherlock Holmes made by Will Ferrell probably is probably the least accurate representation of the stories. Um, and how they were intended to be portrayed by the author. And then on the other hand, Benedict Cumberbatch and all the other actors we showed on the previous slide probably did a better job at telling the stories in the way that the author might have intended them to be told and would have been more happy with. As many ways as there are to address research and to approach research questions, there are right and wrong ways. And hopefully in this presentation and in this class, we'll learn a little bit more about how we can effectively go about answering research questions and in carefully crafting studies to answer our questions of public health. All right, so the first step in carrying out research is identifying a problem. Look around at your surroundings. Think of maybe some experiences you've had with your own health or others' health problems in the past. Maybe look at some other existing public health issues or initiatives that aren't working very well or aren't addressing the roots of the problem um, in very effective ways. Think back about your own experience, or think about the literature you've read, or maybe just some ideas or hunches that you've had, and start digging deeper. Sometimes the problems are easily identifiable, kind of like we see in these two pictures right here. But in other times, the problems are a little bit more difficult to pin down and require a lot more thought um, or research. But start out with what you see, and then just little by little start picking away at the problem and trying to figure out what the root of the problem really is. Maybe take a second in this video um, and write down a couple problems or a couple issues that you personally would like to investigate further. Alright, now once you've identified the problem that you'd like to solve, it's time to start investigating. Right now we'll look at a couple tools that will um, help you and give you the chance to develop in this class and in other classes that will help you become an effective researcher and learn how to answer questions in public health and in other research settings. Alright, the very first idea we're going to talk about is your interest and your enthusiasm. We've all been in those classes or on those projects with those teams where we were forced to work on something that we really were interested in, and we all know that is just a terrible experience. It makes it hard to spend a lot of time on it, and it makes it hard to maintain motivation to want to do well on the project. We're going to try as hard as we can to avoid that. This type of thing is exactly why it's hard for researchers or faculty members in our department and others to assign different research projects to different students, because different faculty have such a wide variety of interests and research goals that, you know, it'd be terrible to assign parts of their projects to students if they're not sure if the student is going to appreciate it as much as they are. But if you want to do good research, you need to want to do it. You need to find the project interesting and engaging. Otherwise, you're just wasting your own or even others' time. Think about your own experience and look for topics that interest you. In fact, let's take 1 minute, pause the video, and let's just spend 1 minute listing out the different things that interest us. Maybe different research topics, or maybe things that you personally would like to look more into, or just things in general that you're passionate about. Make a list really quickly, and then after you're done, go ahead and try and figure out where the family relates to the different things on your list. Alright, the next important step in addressing your problem or your interest is talking to community experts or expert faculty members about your problem. The professors involved in this lab particularly have a wide variety of research interests and experience, and they're here to help you explore your own interests and figure out what you're passionate about. Dr. Crandall, for example, her interests include family health, executive functioning, child well-being, and adult mental health. Dr. Magnuson studies epidemiology and reproductive health, as well as social determinants of health. Dr. Novilla, her interests include health policy, social determinants of health, and family health. And Dr. Hansen researches computational health science, family, adolescent, and mental health. In addition to those guys, our own faculty, there's Professor Hawkins from the School of Family Life, who specializes in policy development for healthy marriage and relationships, divorce, and programs targeted at training responsible fathers. And then from that same department is Dr. Jorgensen, who researches how families manage illnesses and how family relationships change in later life. Occasionally in our group, we also get visited by representatives from community organizations, such as the United Way of Utah or Child and Family Services. And all these people are here to help you out. You're there to help them as well, but they're here to help you figure out your interests and answer any questions you have as you're trying to develop your question and design your research study. So as we are trying to figure out a public health problem that we want to solve, it's important that we narrow it down to a specific outcome that we're interested in improving or addressing. Family health is a super broad topic and isn't the problem we're trying to address. It's more like a means of solving different problems in public health. In deciding on your own problem or interest, it's important to pin it down to one specific health-related outcome, such as one of the ones listed here: cancer, heart disease, suicide, homicide, opioid overdoses, and there's many more besides the ones we see here. Outcomes like cancer, heart disease, or mental health are all outcomes that we can look into and then think backwards and try and figure out how the family plays a role in making a change to those outcomes. Maybe take a second and think about how some of the health outcomes you would like to study or learn more about are affected by the family. Maybe just pause the video for a second, list out a couple public health outcomes you're interested in solving, and then figure out what the connection to family is for each one of those. Alright, now once you've figured out the outcome that you're interested in affecting or changing, it's a good idea to look around at existing literature and see what theories or models have already been developed to explain the relationship you're interested in studying. There are theories and models for just about everything out there, and looking at how other researchers have tried to explain certain connections could help you decide on the best way to carry out your own research. There are lots of different ways to find existing research or different theories on your topic. Google Scholar is always an easy, good place to start. Just type in a few terms or a few words that you're interested in searching and see what comes up. A better idea might be looking into the HBLL's website and going through some of the different databases for more specific information. But But looking specifically at theories and models will help us understand how to structure our research study and collect information in a way that can help us use the family to alter different public health outcomes. Real quick, looking through some of the library's databases for different theories or health models can get a little tricky, and it might be worth introducing our department librarian who can help you go through that process. Mike Goetz is the librarian for the Life Sciences Department, and he is a great resource if you're trying to dig through existing literature to find theories or models relating to family health. Mike's job is to help students access and understand the massive pool of academic literature that we have available to us, and it would definitely be worth your time setting up an appointment to go talk to Mike, or just dropping by his office if you'd like to get your hands on some of the existing literature or theories or models that have been developed on your topic of interest. To set a time with Mike, just go to the HBLL's directory, and there will be a link to his online scheduler. Speaking of Mike, this brings us to an important next step in our research process, reviewing existing literature. Chances are, no matter how unique of an idea you think you have, there are tons of people out there who have been looking at the same thing or trying to address the same problems or questions that you're looking into. Looking through what others have done and trying to identify specific places where you can contribute to the research is a great thing to do. Again, Google Scholar is always a super easy place to start, as well as the other academic databases such as PubMed, PsycInfo, or ERIC. And again, Mike Goetz is a wonderful resource for getting some help looking into these different resources or online databases and understanding some of the existing literature. Here's a super short list of some different books and academic journals with a lot of good information about family health, and it might be worth starting with some of these journals listed here as you do your background research for different projects later on. I'm not going to go through any of these one by one and talk about what they contain, although you do that on your own, but if you're stuck or trying to choose a good place to start, try searching one or a couple of these different journals or books that we have listed here. In my opinion, probably the most important part of carrying out effective research is understanding the why behind what you're doing. If there's nothing that can be done as a result of the research you're doing, or if the information you're finding isn't usable in some way, is it really worth doing? Now think about your question and then try and answer the question why 3 times to get to the real root of the problem you're trying to address. Here's an example on this slide. Someone's trying to figure out why children are dying from school shootings. If you ask why, well, that's because they're spending too much time playing violent video games. Well, then why are the children spending too much time playing violent video games? Well, that's because parents and families are not monitoring their screen time long enough to be with their they're not monitoring screen time among their adolescents. Why? Well, I don't know. Maybe they're not spending enough time together. Maybe the child is playing the games in a different house. Lots of different problems to address there, but this is helping us get to the roots of the problem instead of just trying to understand why kids are dying from school shootings. Kind of on the surface, I guess. All right, now once we have our problem clearly outlined in our minds, it's important to move from a problem to a question that can be answered through a research study. Try using the WATIO method. WATIO stands for what are the effects of blank, or the first blank would be your exposure on the second blank, which would be your outcome among blank, a specific population. For example, here are some examples. What are the effects of family sleep routines, which is the exposure, on depressive disorder, which is the outcome among young adults, which is our population? Or what are the effects of family cohesiveness, which is our exposure, on improved quality of life, which is our outcome among cancer patients, which would be our population? Take 1 second, pause the video, and write down a couple possible research questions using the WATEO formula. Remember, your question might be changed later on depending on the types or the availability of certain tools that exist to measure your outcomes or exposure of interest, but for now, Just worry about writing down a couple of possible questions for your project, and then you can narrow it down later. So go ahead and pause the video and write a couple problems down. All right, now that you have your research problems and your question outlined, we're ready for the next step, which is designing a research study to answer your question. We're going to get into this specific step in an assignment later down the road, but for now, we're going to focus on a different project that you're going to complete before then that will help you answer that question once we get to that assignment. So before we get to designing a research study to answer your question, we're going to talk about your first assignment, which is an annotated bibliography. We're going to have you guys create your annotated bibliography on by looking through existing literature on a topic or a question that you are interested in answering. An annotated bibliography is basically a collection of references to different articles, academic articles that you've read, and then underneath each reference will be a short paragraph of notes, kind of giving context to or summarizing or criticizing the content of that article. We want you guys to create an annotated bibliography on your topic that relates to family health that has at least 10 different articles with short paragraphs between each reference for each article. The style of writing you choose is up to you, be that MLA, APA, or whatever. Just make sure that all your references are done in a consistent style. You're going to be graded on whether or not you have 10 sources, the quality of the short paragraph of notes for each source, and then whether or not they all relate to family health. If you'd like a little more help formatting your document, or if this is your first time doing an annotated bibliography, we've left a little link on this slide to a PDF that BYU has put out on their Writing Center website that explains how to format, how to create, how to write your annotated bibliography. And it's a great resource. Even if you've done one before, it's a good thing to read through and just refresh before you start your project. All right, so when you're writing your short analyses or summaries for each of your 10 references, here are a few good things that you might want to include. You might want to evaluate the information that was in the article. Is the information or is the data displayed reliable? Sometimes you might want to look at how the information was collected from the participants. If it was collected really haphazardly, or if they weren't using very good measures, that might suggest that it wasn't collected very well and it might not be accurate information. Think also about who the audience is. If it was written for adults, or maybe it was written for young adults, or if it was written for people who were interested in improving family health, these might affect how the article is read. Is the data that's presented sufficient or of good quality? Again, look at how they collected their data in the methods section and use that to decide whether or not the information presented is good or of good use. Next is look at the context of the paper. Did the paper make you think about something differently? Or how does this paper contradict or add to what other papers have said? Last, you can summarize in those little paragraphs. Answer the question, what is the purpose of the paper? What are the main takeaways or the main ideas that were presented in the document? If someone were to ask you quickly what the paper was about, how would you sum it up in just 1 or 2 sentences? All these are good ideas. You don't need to include all of them. You don't even need to really include any of these, just whatever you feel like is the most pertinent information and most relevant information from those different articles in helping you or others understand your research question. Once you're done with your annotated bibliography and once you have all the information on the paper, go turn it in on Learning Suite. There's not a limitation on how many pages you should have. Just make sure you have 10 sources with a short paragraph, 5 to 10 sentences below each source, kind of analyzing the different articles that you read. Alright, so in this last part of the video, we're quickly going to go over how to read through academic articles. If you already feel comfortable enough reading through academic literature, then feel free to end the video now and go get started on your assignment. But if you're not, feel free to go along with us as we talk about how to navigate and pull information from academic literature. So when you're reading through an article, the first thing you're going to run into is the abstract. The abstract is basically just a super short version of the paper that you're about to read. The abstract will have short sections, kind of like in this example you see here. The abstract has a short background, objective, methods, and it'll have a results and discussion section, basically summing up in just 1 or 2 sentences the main points from the paper. Abstracts are useful to you, that if you read through them and figure out that the information that they're going to talk about is not pertinent to answering your question, then you can move on to the next one. But the abstract is a good place to start for deciding whether or not you'd like to move on with this article and include it in your annotated bibliography. So right after the abstract, the first larger section of the paper that you're going to read through is the introduction or the background. You can see on this example, the introduction just starts right after the abstract, and it's the first part, the real part of the paper. The information that will be provided in the background is information that you're going to need in order to understand the rest of the paper. The author will take you through other pieces of information or other pieces of literature that he's read that led them to their question and help you see things from their perspective. And this section will usually have a smaller subsection describing exactly what the purpose of their study was. Alright, so the next section in an academic paper that you're going to find after the introduction is the methods section. The methods section will outline in detail how the researcher went about collecting and analyzing information that they pulled from people. They're going to outline how they collected the data from their participants and how they pulled information from them. That's usually included in the first subsection here, 2.1, is the procedures, how they got to the people and how they pulled the information from them. So in this article, for example, it says that they polled people, or they surveyed people using an electronic survey program called mTurk, which sends the survey to lots of different people at one time. After that, they're going to outline their measures. You can see section 2.2 is measures. If there were any questionnaires or different other modes of data collection that were used, they're going to outline them here. Any variable that the research reported in their data analysis in the paper, they're going to have to describe how they got that information to us and what measures they used to get it. For example, in this one, 2.2.1, section 2.2.1, it says physical health outcomes. And here in this paragraph, they're going to describe to us how they got the physical health information for each participant. So body mass index, or BMI, was measured based on the participant's self-report height and weight. Where later on it says, to measure physical exercise, the participants reported the average number of days per week that they engaged in at least 10 minutes of vigorous physical activity, and so on and so forth. They're going to describe these in detail so that if anyone else wanted to replicate their study, they could do so easily. Lastly, the method section will outline how the researchers analyzed their data. If there were any statistical procedures they went through, or any analytical software they used, or models they built to look at the data, they would outline it here. So again, that if anybody wanted to go and repeat their analyses or their study, they can do so just by reading their paper. Alright, the next part of the paper is going to be the results section. In this section, the researchers will firstly tell you about their sample. So right here you see it says section 3, results, and then 3.1 is descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics are basically just telling us some of the demographic information about their sample, such as how many of them were males or females, their age, the racial or ethnic makeup of their sample, the socioeconomic status of their sample, and some other stuff. So here it tells us 41% of the sample was female, the average age was about 35 years old, the percent that was employed was about 87%, and so on and so forth. After they've described their sample, they're going to go through some of the results of their statistical analyses. They're not going to interpret any of the things or the numbers that they describe in this section. They're just going to report them exactly as they came out in their statistical analyses. This is where things might get just a little foggy if you haven't taken lots of or any statistic classes. If the numbers don't make a lot of sense to you, don't worry. Most authors will go over and interpret them for you in the next section or the discussion. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to a professor or a TA or a friend in understanding some of the different statistical results that are going to pop up in this section. So here are just a couple or two terms that might help you interpret different results as you run into them in some of your papers. The first is a p-value. The p-value measures how likely it is that the relationship that you're looking at is due to chance, which means the smaller the p-value, the better, because that means that there's less likelihood that the relationship is due to random error or chance. Or in other words, the smaller the p-value, the more likely it is that the relationship is actually there. If you see one asterisk, kind of like you might see on some of these numbers, over here on the far right, this is 0.11, and there's kind of closer to the top, this is 0.11 with one asterisk. One asterisk means that there's less than a 5% chance that that relationship is just random. If you see two asterisks next to a number, that means that there's less than a 1% chance that the relationship is random. And if you see three asterisks, there is less than a 0.1% chance that the relationship is random. So three asterisks, if you see three asterisks, there's a good chance that the relationship you're looking at actually exists. If you see a number on a table without an asterisk, that means that there is more than a 5% chance that that relationship is attributable to just some random error and probably doesn't actually exist. But you see on this table, there's lots of numbers without asterisks on them, which just means that there's no relationship there. For example, looking at this first number up in the top left, 0.17, that's looking at BMI and how it's related to ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And that number doesn't have any asterisks next to it, so that means that the relationship, if there was a relationship there, there probably isn't one. Any relationship that we see is probably just due to random error or random chance. The second letter we're going to see is the letter N. The letter N tells you how many observations or people participated in the study. For example, if you look at the top of this table, right next to the title, it says N equals 246. That means there were 246 people that participated in this study, and whose data we used in the analyses. You're going to run into tons of other statistical terms as you're going over different articles, and we don't have enough time in this video to go over all of them. But take a look at the discussion section if you get lost or if things get foggy. That might help you understand some of the numbers. And if that still is a little foggy, maybe go ask Google or talk to a professor or a TA or maybe the librarian for some more help understanding those numbers. Alright, the last section is usually the discussion. This is where the researchers will talk about what they found in the study and try to interpret some of the information that they saw in the results section. They're going to talk about the applications and the importance of their findings and how they could be used in different health-related settings. This is where the researchers are going to be asked to think about the numbers that came up in their results and talk about their value and how they add to current literature. For example, in this paper, we saw that kids who grew up without lots of hard circumstances developed differently than kids who did grow up with hard circumstances. And right here in section 4.1, it says the role of shame. And the researchers and the authors of this paper tried to use shame to describe how maybe those kids grew up in different circumstances and how they developed differently because of the feelings of shame they experienced after going through hard times or different things like that. This is where the researchers are going to talk about what they saw and the meaning behind some of the numbers that we saw in the results section. Alright, the very last thing you're going to see is the conclusion. This part is often just lumped in as part of the discussion, but can sometimes appear in its own section or subsection like we see it here. The conclusion is usually just a super brief paragraph at the very end of the paper that tells you in just one or two sentences what the main findings of the paper were and how they could be added to with further research and what their applications are in whatever field the journal is trying to target. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this video and just about sums up our crash course in reading academic literature. Good luck on your own assignments, and if you have any questions or need any help, please reach out to a TA or professor to get them answered. Academic literature can get confusing really quickly, so don't be afraid to reach out to somebody and help answer your questions should they come up. Good luck, and don't forget to turn in your assignment.